Hey, my name's Ian Begley. You're watching the NBA Exchange with Dexter Henry.
Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the NBA Exchange. Still a lot going on in the basketball world. Free agency is now in the second week. Summer League has started. But on this episode of the NBA Exchange, we'll be talking about a player that just won the NBA championship. That's Giannis Antetokounmpo. And joining me, one of my favorite writers covering anything in sports and particularly the NBA. That coming up on this edition of the NBA Exchange. Giannis Antetokounmpo at the end of the NBA season was on top of the world. And there's been a lot talked about him. There's been a lot written about him. But my favorite feature writer, she has a book coming out on him that really dives into him, and I can't wait to read it. She's here to join me on the NBA Exchange. That is Mirin Fader, feature writer for The Ringer. Also now, an author. Mirin, what's up? How you doing?
Hi, it's good to be with you. I'm good. It's been a bit since we talked, but yeah, so good to see you.
Yeah, so good to see you. A lot has happened. Now, almost a year ago, you told me you were working on this book, Giannis, the Improbable Rise of NBA MVP. And I knew this before anybody else did. And I was so excited, so happy that you were working on the book. But for any author, any writer, we know there is a process, Mirin. This isn't easy. You just don't say, hey, I want to write a book tomorrow, and then it's just out. There's a process to this. So talk to me a little bit about the process of writing this book and the decision to want to write a book, a biography on Giannis.
Yeah, exactly. So, first you have to find a literary agent that, wants to work with you and believes in you. And then you have to find the right idea. It can't just be like, okay, this is an interesting idea. It has to be like an idea that will sell. And so I had a couple failed proposals, things that didn't work out. And I had written a story on Giannis and his youngest brother, Alex, for Bleacher Report, where he previously worked. And I just found it really interesting that, we didn't really know much about him. He had just won his first MVP. And I was like, okay, there's missing his storytelling, right? We know he had a tough upbringing, trinkets on the street that he sold. And then he just morphs into a superstar. And we're like, how did you get from A to B? So I just thought, okay, I think this is the one. I think this is the book that I should write. It's human, but it's also super interesting basketball wise. And it just kind of has all the elements that you need to write a book.
Yeah, I like that. See, that has everybody intrigued for the story already. But you really got your chops. You've been writing for a while. You've been a feature writer for quite some time, and you write great long form pieces that I love to read. But through this process, what did you find the difference was between feature writing and then writing a biography on an NBA superstar?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, the metaphor that I think is like, it's the same language between long form and books, but it's a different dialect. So you're working with so much more information, like usually for a long form story, I interview between like 15 and 30 people per story, but I interviewed 221 people for this. And so it's also just like, there's not much out there on Giannis. So, from his early days, in childhood. So it was a lot of like vetting sources and, really interviewing people that have never been interviewed for the first time. So, I think it was different than my long forms, but similar. I think the biggest thing was organization. How do you take 221 interviews and put it into 15 chapters in a coherent way that the reader wants to keep going? So I think that was really hard for me too, is like trying to figure out how to, lasso in all this information.
So when you're interviewing 221 people, right? That's clearly a lot of people.
That's a lot of people
dealing with there and going through a whole bunch of information. Anytime you talk to authors, especially when they do a biography, Mirin, they talk about how they learn so much about the subject or subjects that they're covering in their book. So how much did you learn more about Giannis that we, the public, that you will share with us through the book, hadn't known and you hadn't even known yourself? I assume you learned a lot about him through this process, correct?
Yeah, I learned so much about him. I mean, essentially, childhood was like a giant question mark. Like I literally knew nothing. I don't think most of us did. And talking with his childhood best friends and all the people back home. And I think the things that I learned about him are really swept under the rug. Like, the racism that he experienced growing up, being a Black undocumented child in a majority white country, and the anxiety that he felt being undocumented. Even though he was born in Greece, you don't get birthright citizenship. And so because his parents were migrants. And so living that way and talking with other Black migrants that grew up with him, that experienced similar things, was just very eye-opening. And I think also just how much that still happens in Greece, even though he's ascended the way that he has, even though he's a national superstar. Murals of him are still desecrated with swastikas to this day in Athens. So, that was really important for me to discuss and learn. And I think the other thing is how, a lot of people, they know essentially the broad outline of his life. It was really difficult, but they don't realize that there were moments of happiness and joy and love and laughter during his childhood. I think sometimes we have a tendency to say trauma, 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 but we don't really talk about the good times. And Giannis's childhood was very happy, all things considered. Like, yes, he went through enormous struggle, but that was his normal life. So he didn't really think anything of it. He was just like, oh, I'm happy walking with my brothers, going on 3 different buses to get where we need to go, making a game out of each step. So it was just like really important to show that, there was a lot of love there too.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you brought that up too, because there kind of has been a fairy tale sort of story around Giannis, especially now with him capturing the NBA championship. We'll get to that later. But there was a lot of nuance to the story of Giannis, particularly being Nigerian and Greek, having the Black experience in Greece. I'm glad you touched on this in the book, and I can't wait to read about that. But how much of that experience, the racism that Giannis faced, that he and his family faced, and other Black migrants in Greece face all the time, still today, that don't have the stature Giannis does, how much of that helped shape him and who he is and the player that we see today?
Yeah, it totally shapes him. I mean, it informed every aspect of his experience. One of the reasons why it was really hard for him to even get scouted is because he didn't have a passport. So he couldn't leave the country because he was undocumented. So, he was very used to looking at life through this lens of, I probably won't get an opportunity. And I don't get the same opportunities as my white classmates, even though I was born here just like they were, even though I went to Greek church just like they do, even though I went to the same schools as they do. So, it created, even more determination and work ethic, because that's all he could control. He couldn't control how others treated him and would say racist things from the stands. And that is why it was really important for me to talk with other Black children of migrants that were friends with him growing up, and not just talk about their experience when Giannis was a child, but go through the book and chart their experiences as those people get older. Because, unlike Giannis, they didn't get their citizenship fast-tracked because they had a chance at the NBA. They never got to ascend the way Giannis got to, because they weren't 2 inches taller. They weren't as athletic. They weren't as talented. And I wanted to kind of show them as a contrast to Giannis, to say, look, like, if you didn't have this athleticism and ability to get to the NBA, like, the Greek government was going to treat you like any other Black migrant in Greece, which is not well. So it's just important to have that in there, because identity is so central to who he is. And I will also say, the book, also, I interviewed Nigerian journalists as well who want a deeper connection with Giannis, because they don't feel like it's there, because Giannis doesn't play for Nigeria and doesn't really talk about that side of his life as much, and is so, overwhelmingly talking about his love for Greece. So I think it's an interesting, complicated relationship that Giannis himself, is still trying to figure out.
Yeah, definitely is. And you got to definitely read more about that in the book. Now, in the process of you writing the book, and I talked to you about this before we started recording, but I thought a lot about you as I was watching the NBA playoffs. And I purposely avoided texting you or messaging you, because I thought about it and I said, hey, look, the Bucks have a chance to go to the finals here. This is great promo for the book, especially if Giannis plays well. And I got to think, because of the Bucks, and I've talked to Bucks fans about this, you as an author had to have a roller coaster of emotions with this. You saw a lot happen with the Bucks through the playoffs. So what was it like for you with this book coming out on Tuesday, August 10th? What was it like for you watching the Bucks and Giannis throughout this playoff run, even though it ended well?
Well, I'm glad you didn't text me because you would have just received exclamation points or angry emojis or like head exploding emojis. It would have just been a mess. It was crazy. You know, I was living and dying with the Bucks. I know it's such a bad thing to say, like we're not supposed to cheer in the press box, but I was obviously rooting for the Bucks. And when Giannis got injured, I was so afraid. I was so sad for him. And then they just like miraculously come back. And of course, Kevin Durant's foot, you know, just made me, it was just crazy. It was just such a crazy time. And even when they won, I was just so shocked, you know, it was just so much emotion. I'm like, why am I attached to this franchise? I'm from Los Angeles, you know? But it was really funny. And like all my friends and family got so into it and they all became Bucks fans and they'd order their like Bucks shirts while we watch. And like if they weren't wearing their shirt, they think it was like a superstition. The Bucks are going to lose because we didn't wear a shirt. So it became like a really fun thing for me, even though stressful.
Yeah, it had to be stressful, but it ended well. The Bucks won the championship. We're hoping that's some good help in promoting the book. We hope, I know you're hoping for that, so that can't be bad at all. Now, in terms of Giannis and watching him through the run, Mirin, we've seen a lot of growth, especially if we go back a year ago. Last year, the free agency decision coming up, would he stay with the Bucks? Would he stay in Milwaukee? Would he go elsewhere? But then he sticks with the team. He rides it out. He wins a championship. He wins the finals MVP. His growth as a player, because you've done all the research, you've talked to 221 people. Are you surprised, or should we say this is what expected? Look at the adversity this man has dealt with throughout his life. Maybe we should have expected him to reach this point where he's at the NBA mountaintop.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm surprised, but I definitely think that he, I guess what I saw was somebody understanding his powers in a new way. I think even at the beginning of the playoffs, you just got a sense that he was just hesitating and thinking, and should I go to the basket or I can't because then they'll foul me, then I'll have to go to the free throw line. And you just saw like a second guessing himself. But then, you know, as it wore on, it was like he just figured it out. He just was like, I know what to do. They can't stop me. I'm confident. I'm just going to the basket. And he still shot some threes, which was surprising to me. But for the most part, he stopped doing these bad shots and just went to the basket. And so I think the growth is understanding what he's best at. Like that to me is growth. You know, I think they've tried to make him a guard for so long, you know, when it's just not him. You know, I think we've miscast him his entire career. You know, when he got to the NBA, he was compared to Kevin Durant, and people were saying he can be the next KD. Couldn't be farther from the truth, right? And there's just different players. And so instead of trying to mold him into the prototypical big man, we should have just appreciated Giannis for who he is and what he brings and celebrated those differences and allowed him to flourish the way that he does. So I think now this version of him understands that he is better as a true five. And of course he's going to handle the ball, but really he's dunking on everyone. They can't stop him.
He looked like a modern-day version of Shaq in those finals. And it did look, Mirin, like he figured this out. He figured out what the strengths were in his game. And obviously, it proved to be successful. With the success, winning the championship, winning that finals MVP, what do you think is next for Giannis? What's the next chapter for Giannis? Because does he build on this confidence that we saw from him through this postseason run? You know, people are going to doubt the Bucks next year. Can they do this again? Can Giannis do this again? Will he be consistent with this? You're already hearing the talk about this. What do you think's next for him?
I mean, I think the next chapter is actually off the court. You know, one of the themes that I touch on in the book is his hesitance to speak out about race and his experiences with immigration. When he was younger, like 17, 18 years old, interviewed by Greek websites, of course, he's going to say, I've never experienced racism. No, because he was very much still in that environment and obviously like didn't feel comfortable talking about his experiences. But as he gets older and, you know, it almost feels like every year he's tells a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And I think he realizes his platform, and you saw him be a bit more vocal last year and this year as well. And I think for him, now that the whole world is captivated by him and his platform and his voice and his personality, not to mention his dominant game, I think the next step for him is using his voice to talk more about social issues. And, you know, we've all had this conversation. Can he be the face of the NBA? Can he be the face of the NBA? personally, I think if he uses his voice and his platform, he can have a global voice that's beyond basketball.
That's amazing, and that would absolutely be powerful on a global stage for him to do that. We asked about what the next chapter is for Giannis, but for an author, feature writer as great as yourself, we got to ask, what is the next chapter for Mirin Fader? Is there another book on the way, Mirin? Or are we in the process of trying to figure out some ideas here?
Yes, we are in the process, and I'm going to need your help. So if you would like to text me some ideas, I would like that as well. Trying to find book number 2. I've set an expectation for myself to have the proposal in by December of this year. So I'm just excited, like when I was doing this, it was a really daunting task, especially completing the book in a pandemic is really hard from start to finish. But yeah, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I just want to find that next topic and keep going with that. And I have some good stories for The Ringer coming out soon as well. So yeah, just want to write more and report more, and hopefully not in a pandemic.
Well, hopefully not, because that means you and I can get back to being in a place we like to do some work sometime, in some coffee shops and seeing each other in person and that sort of thing. But I'm sure you will have another great idea. I want everybody to please, if you haven't pre-ordered this book, it comes out tomorrow, Tuesday, August 10th. You can get the book, pre-order it on Amazon. You can also get it already in Barnes & Nobles. If you want, it is Giannis, the Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. Go get that. Mirin Fader, you can check out her work on The Ringer. And please go and support the book. Mirin, good to see you, and thank you for joining me on the NBA Exchange.
Yeah, great to see you too. Thanks for having me.